Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little. I'm here today with another hand review for PokerNews.com. Today I'm going to be reviewing another hand from last year's World Series of Poker. I just booked my house for this year's World Series of Poker. I'm excited to be out there for the whole summer, getting to play a lot of poker tournaments and cash games. So this hand is from a $1,500 buy-in event. We have a relatively large stack right off the bat. We're playing 150, 300, so we're off to a great start. And in this hand, we get king, queen offsuit from the big blind. It's always difficult to play from out of position versus anyone. And, one of the most basic but very relevant tips that many players forget is that you want to play in position. When you play out of position, it's hard to get value with your good hands. And also, it's hard to bluff with your bad hands. It's just difficult to do anything. So definitely be careful from out of position. Anyway, raise to 875 from a tight passive player, and then a call from a random guy in seat 2. I'm typically going to call in this scenario. I'm not really trying to 3-bet king, queen versus a tight passive player because I expect the tight passive player to have a relatively good hand pre-flop. So if he has a relatively good hand and I 3-bet, he's going to call, and then I'm sort of relying on him folding a lot after the flop, and that's not really what I want to do, I don't think, because quite often the tight passive players just have good hands. So I'm going to call here and proceed cautiously. I'm not trying to play a huge pot or get all in or anything like that. So flop comes queen 7-6, 2 spades. For simplicity, you'll find that if you always remember the board high card to low card, that will make things easier to remember in your mind. At least for me, in my experience and with most of my students' experience. Don't remember 7-6 queen, remember queen 7-6. So queen 7-6, should we lead in this spot? I don't particularly like leading because if the initial raiser has an underpair or ace king or ace jack, something like that, he's not going to pay us off for very many chips. Also, the guy in seat 2 probably did not connect too well with this board, although there are 2 connected low cards on board, so he could certainly have some of that. But if he does, I think if we check and the initial raiser bets, seat 2 is going to either call or fold, and we'll have a reasonable idea of how we want to proceed. Either way, from out of position in this scenario, I'm typically just check calling. I do think leading is a fine play if the initial raiser is very loose, because then he might try to bluff you. And I think you can play king-queen as the effective nut hand versus a loose player, but not against a tight passive player. If this guy raises on queen 7-6, we're usually not so happy about our hand. So I'm going to check and see what develops. Checking from out of position is a pretty strong hand. It checks through. So when it checks through, what does that mean? It means the tight passive player probably missed the board, which sort of implies ace-king or ace-jack or pocket jacks, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, pocket 8s. This guy over here probably doesn't have anything because he probably would have bet if he had a queen, and he probably would have bet if he had a draw. So this guy probably has not so much. So we're not so concerned with him. So the turn's a king. And let's think about what's going to happen if we bet, given we think that the player in seat 2 doesn't have much, and the king probably did not help him. And if the tight passive guy has a king, what's going to happen? And if he has nothing, what's going to happen? Well, if he has nothing, say he has ace-jack or pocket jacks or worse, and we bet, he's just going to fold, which isn't really what we want because all those hands are drawing dead. If he has a king, namely ace-king, maybe king-jack, we're going to check, he's going to bet, and then we can proceed from there. And so we start building a pot. You'll also find that a lot of tight passive players have the propensity to not fold any hand they perceive as good. And most tight passive players will view ace-king on this board as, quote-unquote good. So I actually like checking in this spot, even though we improved a lot. The issue is that if I bet something like 2,000 on the turn and then 4,000 on the river, notice we're not all in. And I want to play all in this spot. I do realize that sometimes we will be up against pocket kings or pocket queens or maybe the lower sets. And if that happens, that is just unlucky. Do not get in the habit of trying to not play big pots unless you have the absolute nuts. A very mandatory skill you must master is figuring out when you have the effective nuts. And I think here we do have the effective nuts, which is a hand that we are happy to play for stacks. So I'm going to check here, and I'm usually going to be check raising if the tight player bets. And if it checks through, that just means we have the best hand and everyone else has nothing, and it's hard to play a big pot when everyone has nothing. At least we gave them the opportunity to bet. So this tight passive player bets 1125 into 3,000. And then this player calls. Okay, this is good. At this point, you have to assume that the tight passive player has a king, because he probably would not bet without a king. Some tight passive players would bet larger with a king because they want to protect their hand, which is usually not a good idea, but a lot of players will do that. So I'm not necessarily sure this player has a king, but he did bet, which is at least a good sign. This player called. So now when this player's calling, he likely has either a king or some sort of a draw, like maybe Jack 10 because the bet was so small, maybe even Ace Jack, maybe Ace 10. So I don't particularly want to let this guy see a card for free. I mean, I'm not so concerned about the draws. I don't want to make it sound like that. But if we call here, we make his call not so bad. If we check raise here, we do make this guy's call much worse because now he's going to have to fold out his equity, which is fine. So here, I think type passive guy is drawing very thin. Probably he's going to have ace king or king jack, or maybe pocket aces if he's doing some weird slow play. This guy's going to have some equity. So by check raising, we'll likely be able to play a big pot versus this type passive guy who's drawing thin and make the guy who has a little bit of equity fold, which is fine. Or you can call and, you really want him to call, but he's not going to call if you check raise. So I think here we want to check raise to something like 3,500. I think that'd be a pretty sweet check raise. Notice then if we make it 3,500 and the type passive player calls, pot's going to balloon up to 11,000 or so, and our opponent's going to have 9,500 left, and that will allow us to easily shove the river. So I definitely like check raising to something like 3,500 here. I go 4,400. It's a little bit big, I think. I really don't want to scare my opponents off. But at the same time, if you think your opponent will view a big check raise as an obvious draw, then check raising becomes fantastic. I think I would have preferred a little bit of a smaller raise here, though, because we really do want, both players to call. Because any amount they put in at this point is they're going to be investing quite poorly versus our hand on average. This guy goes all in, which is great. Like I said, we're not folding. Do not get in this scenario and trick yourself into making a big fold. This guy's going to be overvaluing ace-king or pocket aces. He may have king-queen. He may even be overvaluing random king-jack just because in the World Series of Poker, a lot of type passive players make that blunder. So we do call it off, and he shows ace-king. And just like that, we got up to 6 starting stacks right off the bat in this $1,500 buy-in World Series of Poker event. So a great start in this event. I don't remember how I did exactly in it. I do know I made, I believe, 2 deep runs in $1,500 events. I think it took something like a 20th and a 30th last year in 1,500s. I somehow final tabled at 5K, which is good. You want to be final tabling the 5Ks. that is where you're going to make a lot of money. But anyway, this was a pretty interesting hand because I really think betting the turn in this scenario is a very big mistake. And you'll see a lot of players just bet right out with the turn. And, I'm guilty of that too. You make a good hand, and how do you get money in the pot with a good hand typically? You bet. But in this scenario, I think the best way to go about getting full value is to check. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please let me know on Twitter at Jonathan Little. Let the people at Poker News know that you enjoyed it as well. And also be sure to check out my weekly blog and podcast over at jonathanlittlepoker.com. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.